Good evening. My name is Keith Scott. I'm the Director of Education for the SAFE Center. The SAFE Center is the primary agency of victim services in Nassau County. We provide an array of services from domestic violence services, child abuse services, human trafficking services. We have the 24/7 hotline for Nassau County. We provide an array of services for all victims of abuse under one roof. But we're joined here to talk about a different issue tonight. Tonight, we're coming together to stand as one county against domestic violence, one county to speak about the realities of domestic violence. So thank you to everyone that joined us, and thank you to everyone that is sharing our video tonight. It's going to be about an hour and 20-minute presentation outlining the realities of domestic violence. And our hope is that the viewers walk away with more of an understanding about what domestic violence is, how to recognize it, and knowing that the SAFE Center is there to help with anything. I just want to start off before we hand it over to thank our county executive. She could not make it tonight in person, but she recorded a video just to express her gratitude and thanks to everyone for sharing this and also speaking about domestic violence. Of course, our district attorney, Madeline Singas, which is our keynote speaker tonight. Thank you, DA Singas, for being here. In addition to that, we have Joseph Saladino from the town of Oyster Bay. We have Judy Bosworth from the town of North Hempstead, Legislator Abrahams, Legislator Drucker, Legislator D. Reggie Witten, Legislator Nociello, Legislator Walker, Legislator Ford, Legislator Gaylor, Legislator Coppell, Legislator Ferretti, Legislator Rhodes, Legislator Lapizan. Thank you so much for taking the time to share this event, and thank you so much for taking the stance against domestic violence. So we're going to pass it over to the District Attorney Singas right now, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Keith. It's my absolute pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank all the other executives who took the time to watch and lend sort of their gravitas to such an important event. We're so fortunate here in Nassau County to have the SAFE Center, a place where so many have found relief and have found help, a place where so many of us in law enforcement call and look to for support in the work that we do. So thank you, Keith, and everyone that you work with for the work that you do every single day and for all the people that you help, women and children especially, to get through some of the darkest periods of their life. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you to everyone watching who works with so many of the survivors that we deal with in our cases. So again, I guess the theme here is that we all have to stand together. We all have to make sure that we do our part to assist the victims, to turn victims into survivors, to give them the resources that they need to move forward, and to make sure that we stand against the perpetrators who commit these crimes, to make sure that there's a very clear signal coming from Nassau County leaders and government and citizens that we are not going to tolerate this kind of behavior in our county. And I'm proud to say, I know that many of you have seen the U.S. News and World Report ranking, which ranked Nassau County the safest county in the country. And we're all very proud of that statistic. But yet we know that there are many people suffering. I started the Special Victims Bureau in the District Attorney's Office in Nassau County in 2006. And it was important then that we put these cases together in one bureau, that we give the training, the necessary training for assistant DAs and people who are working with these victims, that we expanded that training into the police and law enforcement who was coming into contact with victims and making sure they can recognize the signs of domestic violence, and that they would make the arrests and take the cases as seriously as they needed to be taken. And that we had a bureau where we would invite in the professionals from the SAFE Center to assist us in dealing with our witnesses and making sure that they received the strength that they needed to move forward with the prosecution, because that is a very difficult thing for a survivor to do, to testify in court, to continue pursuing a case, to stand their own ground as they try to move forward and put their lives together again. And for us in the DA's office, that's one of the hardest things that we have to do. We become very invested in people's lives and trying to make sure that we're giving them the tools that they need to move forward, that we are holding their perpetrator accountable. But at the same time, we have people for such a small window in the larger scheme of things. And that pains us because we know that we have to walk away and pick up another case. And there's often times I have thought about the women and children that I have encountered in my life as an assistant DA and now as a DA. And I often think about them and wonder, were they able to move forward? Are they okay? How has this incident that for me was fleeting, how has it impacted that person's life moving forward? Has it paralyzed them, or have they grown and been able to move forward? And anyone who works with these cases always has thoughts of those people that we've met that we try to help. And for me, it's especially comforting, and for the assistants, especially in special victims, to know that we have professionals at the Safe Center that can pick up where we leave off, that can continue providing the services, that can continue being the people on the other end of the phone when someone is feeling very vulnerable or frightened, and will help them piece their lives back together again. And so I'm incredibly proud of the county and the way that we come together in that way to service these people so that they can, again, put their lives together and leave this in the past and move forward with dignity and grace. And I'm proud of the work that we do every day in the DA's office to help women and children do that. And for me personally, it was this area of law in the DA's office was something that motivated me in a way that nothing else had. I think because I had a stable childhood, and for me, my home was always a place of great inspiration and support and confidence building, that I couldn't imagine that there were some women and children, because that's who we're dealing with mostly, and obviously sometimes men too, where their homes became the place of great pain and violence. And they would look to escape that home because that's the only time that they found relief, when they were away from their home. I couldn't fathom that people who purport to love each other could create and cause such pain, both physically, emotionally. I couldn't believe what I saw and what I heard, and that motivated me to want to make sure to give people a voice, victims a voice, to make sure that I would level that playing field if they were unable to, and I would hold a perpetrator accountable. I would get services that people needed, whether it's victims or defendants, so that that family can, if that's what their desire was, move forward together as a family, or that we gave the victim the strength and the tools and the resources to move on, while at the same time making sure that that person who hurt them could never hurt them again. So for me, on a very personal level, and I know all the assistant DAs, and I know so many people who work in this area, find that so motivating, that sometimes people would say to me, how is it that like, isn't it so depressing to be at work and that's all you see and that's all you hear? Like, how do you go to work every day? And I would often say, how do I not go to work every day knowing what I know? Who else will be there for them if I'm not there for them? So no, it wasn't a place of depression and like futileness. It was a place where we found empowerment, and there's nothing that's more satisfying than making survivors feel whole again, letting survivors know that they are worthy and that they can build the life that they want with their children. And to enable someone to do that is really some of the most gratifying work that I have ever done. And this is, we're in unique times because the pandemic has affected every one of us in so many ways. And yet the pandemic has also created this perfect storm where violence is thriving in a domestic violence home, because anything that existed before, if there was abuse before or violence before, in this climate has become so exacerbated. It has become, whether it's financial strain, whether it's the strain of not being able to communicate with other people who give you support, whether it's substance abuse that we know has been increasing because of the stressors that the pandemic has really caused so many people. We're concerned. We're very concerned about domestic violence victims and children who were behind closed doors for many months without any relief, without any the usual support systems that they may have. And that's continuing to this day, because if you're working from home, if you're going to school from home, that's a perfect breeding ground for an abuser to continue to exercise power and control over you. And there is no relief. We know that in other normal circumstances, a woman who is in trouble will go to work and talk to a coworker. She'll go to school and she'll talk to a professor or a teacher or a friend. She'll be able to go to a family gathering. She'll be able to get to somewhere like the Safe Center to find professional help, all without raising the suspicion of her abuser, because that's just in the daily course of her life. But when now she is behind closed doors and she doesn't have access to those vehicles, the situation becomes incredibly dangerous for her and for her children. And that's what has us very concerned. So again, this pandemic for so many people has turned into a very dangerous situation, in addition to all the other concerns, be it financial or emotional, that people normally are dealing with in a situation like that. So, I've told people, and I've done a lot of interviews where I'm asking people, if you think someone's in trouble, give someone a call, go by and visit. Now it's getting a little better. We can at least go visit with a mask and make sure that everything is okay. Talk to a person on the phone so you can hear how she sounds to you, whether it's your sister, your mother, your best friend. You can tell from her voice if things are okay versus a text. Texts are a little hard. And we also know that abusers monitor phones and texts and so on, and that becomes a dangerous situation. So I guess I'm imploring everyone to make sure that we're here for each other and reaching out to people that we think may be in trouble. And we've seen it, with our elders. Our senior abuse cases have gone up significantly since the onset of the pandemic for the same reason. We have seniors who are in homes where violence may be prevalent, and that just again becomes exacerbated, and they have no outlet. A senior who was going to a house of worship or going for their weekly doctor's appointment now does not have that opportunity to do that, and we don't know what's going on behind closed doors. Same thing with our child abuse victims. Kids were in school and teachers would let us know if something seemed amiss. If they saw bruising, kids would often talk to their teachers about what was going on and we would get information. Now we don't have eyes on those kids. We don't have eyes on those seniors, and we don't have eyes on so many of these women who may be in trouble. And that concerns us in law enforcement. So that's something that we're making sure we're educating people on. We're offering, I know you will later, Keith, all the phone numbers that people need to contact us so that we can intervene if necessary. But those are the kinds of things, especially those, our legislators or our representatives, as you're talking to people in the community, those are kinds of things that you should always have in the back of your mind, and educating people about how to get assistance if they need it, how to get inside someone's home if you think there's someone in trouble. And, we have an excellent police department who we work with every day that can help us in that. I mean, generally for us, education is increasingly important. And at the DA's office, we place incredible emphasis on education. And in normal times, our assistant DAs were in schools talking to kids and young women and young men about relationships and about healthy relationships and what those relationships look like. And how to look for signs that you may be in an abusive relationship. And we start at high school, and we probably should start younger than that, so that people can understand issues that might be red flags for them, and that they should be able to find help if they need it, and to discuss those with people who are professionals. We talk to our high school students and about dating, about no means no, about sexual assaults, things that they might not be hearing at home, but things they absolutely need to be aware of and educated about. So what does that mean? What does it mean to date? How do abusive relationships exist using electronics, using your phones, using your tracking, using text messaging, social media? How does that impact dating? So again, those are things that we just like to flag for young women and young men at a time when they're making choices and they're cementing sort of what their relationships and their outlook on relationships is moving forward. We want to make sure that they're getting good information, and that they're thinking about things, and that they are giving pause when something doesn't seem right or seems too controlling. Again, in addition to the excellent services we receive throughout the county, in the DA's office, we have a victim services unit, which we applied for a grant and got crime victim advocates inside our office. And all of the services that we provide are offered free of charge. And that was thanks to a $3 million grant that we got from the government. And that was an incredible tool for us to utilize. And in addition to all of the work and the resources that we get from the county, we're always looking for grant opportunities so that we can increase our outreach and increase our services to to the community at large. So, I mean, in closing, I just want to say that we are very fortunate in Nassau that we have so many professionals committed to making sure that our women and children are safe. There are so many resources for everyone, including defendants, so that we can make sure that people address the issues that may be fueling their anger or fueling their abuse. We have a trained and highly skilled prosecutor's office that for me, one of my top priorities is making sure that as a society and as an office, we take care of those who are the most vulnerable amongst us. So thank you all for the incredible work that you do. And thank you for putting this together, Keith.
Thank you, DA Singas. Thank you for your remarks. Thank you for always being a supporter of victims of abuse. And thank you for everything you do on a daily basis. We're very grateful to have you. So With that being said, now we're going to pass it over to our recorded video from County Executive Laura Curran. She took the time to record a video outlining the importance of Domestic Violence Awareness Month and the work being done in Nassau County. So thank you, County Executive. And that video should be coming up in 1 second.
To be together in person for this event. Hi everyone, it's Nassau County Executive Laura Curran. I wish that we could be together in person for this event, but this is how we're doing things these days. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to thank the Safe Center, the staff, the leadership, the volunteers, for all the amazing work you do, the teamwork that you bring, so many smart experts in so many different fields coming together to help victims of domestic violence, of sex trafficking, of child abuse. You know, during this pandemic, you saw more than anyone else what the impact was of being locked down, being at home, when people really were in the clutches of their abusers with no escape. You're there every day. I am grateful to you. You also know that 3 out of 4 Americans know someone who is or has been the victim of domestic violence. You know how pervasive this is. So again, thank you for what you do. Keep doing what you're doing, and I look forward to continued partnership and teamwork.
Thank you again to our county executive. Before we pass it over for the presentation, I just want to once again thank everyone for taking the time to come out tonight and to share this tonight. You know, these are unprecedented times. You know, we're all working from home. We're more stressed than usual. There's a lot going on in all of our lives. So I just want to say once again, I've said it before, just thank you so much for coming out, and thank you so much for all of our executives and leadership in the county for taking the time to raise awareness about this issue and just come forwards and stand up against domestic violence. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to our wonderful education coordinator, Liz Osowicki. Liz has been an education coordinator at the Safe Center for over 3 years. She does an amazing job doing presentations for professional communities, whether it's mental health professionals, hospitals, schools, nurses, and she also runs programs in a variety of middle and high schools throughout Suffolk and Nassau County, raising awareness about, recognizing abuse and recognizing intimate partner violence. So without further ado, Liz, thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here, for all of your support on this mission to end domestic violence in our community. We really do appreciate having these community partnerships that highlight the importance of this issue and also help us to continue the work that we're doing. So I'm Liz. I am an education coordinator at the Safe Center, as Keith said. I have been part of the Safe Center's education department for 3 years. Before that, I was a SAFER advocate. So I was one of the hospital volunteer advocates, and we'll talk more about that when we get into more about the services that the Safe Center has to offer. So today's presentation, in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we're going to talk about some myths and facts regarding domestic violence, the dynamics of this crime, and we also can even just highlight that the language around this issue is changing, and domestic violence sometimes leaves people out of the conversation. And if you hear the term intimate partner abuse, intimate partner violence, even abbreviated as IPA or IPV, and the DV that we see sometimes. So just being aware of how the language is changing and how we can incorporate all people when we don't just assume that domestic violence looks a certain way. I'd also encourage everyone to follow our social media accounts. We are always posting up-to-date information. You can find out when all our events are happening. We're posting about our supporters. So feel free to follow us on all of those platforms if you have a moment. And now we are going to talk more about why we're here. 55% of female murder victims are killed by an intimate partner. So this is a statistic by the CDC, a very recent statistic. We're highlighting that we wouldn't assume that 55% of female murder victims are killed by the person that maybe it tells them they love them every day, comes home to them at night, right? Maybe we assume, like we see in the media, that murder victims that are females happen in the most crazy ways, right? Someone jumped out of somewhere. Sometimes it's our own fault because we walked under something, an anvil, right? We don't assume that it's the person that is supposed to be there for you. So this statistic should be really shocking. How did we get here? How did we get to this point where that statistic exists, where that's true for many women, and for women of different backgrounds, these statistics vary even more and people can be affected even more greatly. So how did we get to this point? We can think about some of the values and some of the thoughts that people had about specific groups in the past. We can think about even with Confucius origins, there were highlighting that a man is to only be respected. The father is to be respected first, and then the husband, and respect yourself last. There's traditions that highlight these things, and that's not to say that these traditions are violent or inappropriate in themselves, right? But we can talk about how we got to this point where maybe some people feel that they have ownership over other people. The tradition of be a bride being walked down the aisle and passed from her father to her groom, right? These traditions show the portrayal, the way that women were looked at in society. We can also look at how besides the way women are portrayed in media, the way women are represented in our communities in positions of power. So we do have to take a look at how we got to this point and take a look at how progress was worked for. And maybe there are still some things that have to be done. When we think about how women are portrayed in the media and advertisements, maybe some specific words come to mind. If anyone has heard of the term hypersexualization, that's something that people are looking at a little bit more when we're talking about women in the media and how they're portrayed as members of society. So we can even show this ad that you can tell it looks a little old, and it is old. And it's talking about a husband being able to beat their partner if they find out they're not getting the freshest coffee, right? And the whole point of this is that a lot of people will say these are just jokes. Think of the jokes that people make about putting a woman back in the kitchen and where she belongs, and having these ideas that, as Keith said, I train in many of the high schools, and these views are still relevant and still perpetrated today, perpetuated in our schools, where people believe that there's a certain hierarchy and that there is acceptable behavior for men beating women. These ideas that look at the different covers of these magazines, right? Can we spot the difference of the way that certain people are represented, right? If we were able to talk about some of the terms that the top row brings to mind versus the bottom row, right? There are just different ways that may have to do with, as we said, how we got here, right? And there's so much more to the dynamics of this crime and to the ideas of entitlement. And there's so many resources about that. But we can also just look at as a society how we got here. Thinking about some of the most popular media of the times, right? Of some past times, but the representation of sexualizing women, while usually the men are clothed in the ads or in the previews. And if we take a look at the next slide, and you might even recognize some of these films. You might like some of these films, and that's not a bad thing, right? That's what we have to recognize also, is that being able to be aware of the issues and know where the line is what's the most important part about preventing these crimes, because we won't cross those lines. We won't allow others to cross those lines. So we can enjoy films without objectifying individuals, because when people are seen as objects, how do we think that it would be easy to respect those people, right? So in this study, they showed how women were portrayed in the top 500 films for a certain period of time. and take a look at how many times the women were the ones wearing, female identifying characters were the ones that were partially naked, right? And the male identifying characters were maybe speaking more, clothed more. They knew what to do more. There's certain ads where people have, maybe you're aware of this story already, that Meghan Markle wrote a letter to a soap company. Like, I'm not sure what dish soap, don't want to sell anyone out, but a dish soap company that said, women all over are using this dish soap. And as a child, like a 6-year-old girl, she wrote, or a 11-year-old girl, she wrote a letter that to the soap company and told them that I think everyone can wash dishes, and I don't think it's appropriate that your commercial says only women wash dishes. And they changed the commercial. So these are examples of how our voice really does make a difference, and that awareness can make a difference as well. So let's talk about what this crime is about and some of the misconceptions that allow it to thrive. Which one of them is silence. One of them is the fact that it's really awkward to talk about these things, and especially if it's the person that's in the relationship. So having the language to do that, having the empathy to know what this person's really going through can help when we're helping people and helping people heal. Domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior in any intimate relationship. So we said it doesn't have to be domestic in a home. It doesn't have to be intimate in a sense that these people are acting in an intimate way, but a relationship where two people are considered more than a friendship, an intimate relationship, a partnership, whatever they refer to it as, especially now. It's tough to keep up with what we refer to it. Usually people say it's just a thing, their thing, right? So we're encompassing all relationships where if there is a pattern of abusive behavior by one partner to gain and maintain power and control, that may be a sign that domestic violence is present. We want to recognize the difference between an unhealthy relationship and a violent, abusive relationship. When there are patterns of unhealthy and abusive behaviors, patterns that we seem to escalate, patterns that escalate the control, escalate the sense of control, escalate the sense of powerlessness that the other person feels. And this means that it doesn't start right away. It doesn't start on a first date with a bloody lip and a black eye, which is often how they'll show these relationships in ads or in movies. As we said, they'll show the woman being abused in a violent way. So recognizing that abuse escalates over time. That means that it may start with psychological abuse. A person may just use their words to gain that control over another person. Sometimes their words that gain control feel good. When you're telling a person, I love you more than anyone else in the world, and they're like, okay, well, we just met, but okay. And they tell you, I've never met anyone else like you. I want to be around you all the time. And maybe that doesn't feel so bad. Some people right away are like, no way, boundaries. And that's great. But what about when someone crosses those boundaries? When a person doesn't respect the fact that you said, no, I don't like to be followed everywhere. And they start showing up after class, after work, after your workout, right? These are escalating instances where it never even has to get to physical abuse. So realizing that domestic violence is not always physical, and that this abuse may escalate to a point where all they have to do is threaten violence or threaten further abuse, and the person knows exactly when to stop, right? The victim knows exactly when to stop whatever the abuser is telling them is this behavior causing the abuse, right? So realizing that this crime escalates, and if we really thought that it happened on a first date, right, the way to just explain that to people, and this is not a funny topic in any way, but if you tell a group of people, you paint a scenario for them, you go out on a first date and they look cute and you look cute and you feel good, and then they punch you in the face. It doesn't happen that way. If it did, we would know who is an abuser and who's not. If it did, it would be much easier. If it did, 1 in 3 women would not be a victim of abuse. If it did, 1 in 3 women would not be killed at the hands of their partner, right? So just understanding that domestic violence escalates. Domestic violence, like we said, is a public health crisis. Domestic violence or partner abuse affects 1 in 3 women, and 1 in 4 women experience some form of physical abuse. And we'll talk more about what ways that type of abuse can be perpetrated. And we know that men are victims of this crime as well. When we're speaking about the way that abuse can be emotional and psychological, it's very important to recognize that the dynamics of abuse using children in abusive relationships, using someone's sexual orientation that is a male who maybe isn't out publicly as a person of the LGBTQ community, considering how this abuse might be a way to gain and maintain power and control. And we see that 1 in 7 men experience physical abuse by a partner. As we said, in the LGBTQ community, there are specific risks that these couples face, as well as specific barriers that these couples may face. So consider how the LGBTQ community has been stigmatized for such a long period of time that it may make it harder to feel comfortable to say that this abuse is taking place. Who can we go to if the people we trust don't accept this part of us, right? So who do we go to when service providers are not fully competent on how these survivors may experience abuse or how they identify, right? And that's where always being inclusive and not only including them, but supporting and loving this community, asking them how they identify or what makes them comfortable. That's really easy to add to an intake form, to add to a survey, prefer to self-identify and give them that option. This is how we learn rather than try to just assume, right? And that's what unfortunately has hurt people for so long, these assumptions about this community. And like we said, of course, figuring that the special boundaries to getting help can include services, can include personal boundaries, can include the threat of being outed. So we do see that there are specific barriers to getting help for this community. As far as victimization of intimate partners in the United States, there has been an increase in recent years. We're seeing that up to 42%, there was an increase in the number of intimate partner violence victimizations in the United States. Now, there can be many different things that contribute to this type of increase. We're aware that as the District Attorney Madeline Singas spoke on the experiences now of financial stress of being within the home all the time. So considering what was happening during these times that could have contributed to this increase, never caused, but as we are aware, there are certain factors that can contribute to less reports, right? Seeing less people, not being out as much, contributing to more violence, being in the home all the time, not having any of the reliefs or releases that we used to have. So it's never an excuse for this type of behavior. It is also just some information about when we want to be more active, when we want to be raising more awareness, helping out, reaching out to more people. And sometimes this is the one that gets to people. Partner abuse affects pets. if we think about what an abuser is doing, maybe this will even help to understand the dynamics a little bit better, because abuse is not about what this person did, because dogs poop on the floor all the time, right? These types of things are about taking your anger out on a more vulnerable person, whether that's a child or an animal or the partner that you have convinced with your words or actions that they are less than, right? It doesn't take a punch to the face if you tell someone every day how little they are, right? So thinking about the vulnerability of animals and the vulnerability that someone who can't fight back. And maybe that'll give a little insight into an abuser's mind, right? And it's not about what the other person did, it's about the person, victim, being vulnerable. And vulnerability is not their fault, right? We always look at different vulnerabilities, realizing that, you know, your developmental experience is not a vulnerability. It's people who take advantage, right? Your race is not a vulnerability, but people being racist, and racism is what makes that a vulnerability. So realizing what that vulnerability means is that it is built by the abusers and the oppressors. Domestic violence arrests in Nassau County, we see more than 1,500 arrests per year in Nassau County. And as we said, we are working under the same roof as the Nassau County Special Victims Squad. So we are all really connected in how to prevent these crimes and, unfortunately, prosecute these crimes if they do happen. Prosecute them in a way that's trauma-informed and healthy for victims and their families, right? That a whole family being broken apart by domestic violence really is going to need a different type of support than only police intervention, right? 5 to 7 deaths per year due to domestic violence in Nassau County. And we also just want to highlight that domestic violence also includes other types of family violence, right? So that could include brother, mother, right? Sisters, these types of things, aunts and uncles, they are considered domestic violence scenarios also. We do see that this number varies, but unfortunately the 5 to 7 statistic is when we round up all these numbers from a whole bunch of years. But if we look at just 2018 and 19, we saw only, I think, 1 death in 16, and then that number was kind of steady at 1 to 3, and then we do see, unfortunately, there are some of these things still happening right here in our towns. We see, unfortunately, I think it was in 2016 that we had a death due to domestic violence here in Nassau County, right in Bethpage, which is just close to home for the Safe Center. And unfortunately, this tragic, horrific story highlighted so many of the realities of this crime that people missed, that the children were also affected, that the person ended up being killed at the end of the relationship. So we do want to just recognize that this is real right here in our towns. The intersectionality that we really need to focus on, recognizing that racism and sexism, and when we're looking at how we got here with all of the examples, a lot of that does have to do with sexism, right? The hypersexualization and the way that people are portrayed. So if we think about how different people of different backgrounds will experience these crimes differently. And that's just a fact, because if someone's experiencing sexism and racism, it's not the same as experiencing sexism. So we do have to make sure that our treatment is intersectional, that our conversations are intersectional, and the statistics prove that this issue affects people differently. Black women were significantly more likely to be killed by an acquaintance, almost double than a white victim. When we looked at some other statistics about the way that these crimes intersect, Unfortunately, we do see up to 2 to 2.5 times more likely that these women experience more horrific acts of violence. So let's talk about the different types of abuse. Like we said, sometimes people assume that abuse can only be perpetrated in one way. So abuse can be physical, emotional, psychological, it can be sexual, and it can be financial. And there are different ways that all these different behaviors can play out. So you could just take a sec with this slide, but then we'll break these down a little bit more. Strangulation, a form of physical abuse that has been upgraded on the scale of severity, upgraded on the scale of crime. So this is a Class C felony if somebody obstructs the airway of another person. And this type of physical abuse, unfortunately, similar to the other types that we'll talk about, have become almost normalized in society. That this is sometimes the way that we see domestic violence perpetrated before it gets out of hand, quote unquote. Maybe it's just a quick hand on the neck, or they're pushed against the wall with a hand on their neck, or they're grabbed in that way, right? Or it's done in a way that was consensual before and now is not, and is crossing a line. So this has to be taken very seriously. And again, the normalization comes in so many different forms. I've heard an interview of someone saying, we've all put our hands on our girl. We've all had to do it at least once or twice, and people are agreeing with that. We want to be the ones to step up and say, that's not love, that's not okay, whatever is comfortable for us. That their eyes look like this, or they admit that they have been a victim of, and they may not call it strangulation. They may not say I was strangled, because people often consider that with either passing out or death, right? So just recognizing that the language of being choked, the language of anything like that, hands around my neck, these types of things are strangulation. And we can help people to realize that. Other forms of physical abuse that we may not talk about often, things like blocking a person in a room and not letting them leave, right? Standing in front of the door, or grabbing them so they can't physically leave a place, right? So that's how we can kind of remember that it's physical abuse. If the person's being physically restrained or restricted from going somewhere, physically pushed or pulled or grabbed, these types of things, they don't have to leave a mark. Physical abuse is any physical behavior that helps a person gain or maintain power and control. So they never have to put their hands on you, as long as they, raise their fist and punch something else, right? These things show a sense of control. And that's where emotional abuse or coercive control, intimidation, these types of things come into play. And these often are how abuse would escalate. Maybe it started, like we said, with the person convincing you that you need to be with me at all times, that we are what's best for each other. And as soon as that happens, maybe the person starts criticizing everything about that person. Maybe they start criticizing the people around them, right? So that it's just me and you, because your parents suck and your friends suck, right? The humiliation that can happen, and it doesn't have to happen in public. Humiliation is when someone preys on your insecurities, when somebody preys on a deep trauma that you've experienced. Humiliation can be sexual, right? So these are all forms of abuse, and no one can say to you, as abusers may try, that no one heard, or what are you so upset about? That understanding that these are forms of abuse, insults, constant patterns of this behavior, right? If you remember, we said that these patterns show in a relationship. They start showing slowly. Maybe it starts right, it snaps right away, where all of a sudden you don't understand why they're being so mean, right? They were so sweet, and now they're calling you all these names that you see in this fist: pathetic, crazy, a loser, a failure, right? Things that you notice are a pattern, and then you wonder why, if you were such a loser, why they're constantly checking up on where you are, right? Why are they constantly following your location, right? These patterns in a relationship can kind of send that message that it's about power and control. It's not about that person, right? They are not actually all those things. The person will defend their stalking and checking up with accusations of cheating, right? So these things that always flipping the script on a person, and that's what we want to be aware of. It's the checking up and constant stalking without consent. It's insults, right? These are the things that are actually unhealthy and abusive. Stalking, like we said, is another type of crime that has almost become normalized in our society. People refer to this term about social media, right? So again, just realizing that we are not stalking someone if we're looking at public information. If we cross a line and we show up where they always are without communicating that, if that creates an element of fear in the person who is the target of the stalking, it is considered stalking, right? It's not about the fact that I just really liked you and I just wanted to show you that. If the person feels fearful, it can be a case of stalking. It can be considered stalking. So we always, right, we talk about a lot of the unhealthy things because we're speaking on domestic violence and really being able to be there for people. But as we said, we do offer healthy relationship workshops because there are ways to combat these unhealthy behaviors and to recognize them in youth that are building relationships, because domestic violence, as we said, escalates. And if we allow it to escalate from, find my friends and the teens that are stalking their partners, and then I meet adults who are in situations where they're very traumatized, admittedly, and they are receiving treatment for that. And in their cases, there was a tracker thrown in their car. There was a tile thrown in their car to track them. There was mileage tracked. If how far they went to the store wasn't exactly how far their miles said, then that might result in something worse. So if we normalize these other behaviors of stalking, we may be encouraging things that we're like, what? That sounds absurd. Except for when it is becoming so normalized. And unfortunately, this also is proven to escalate. Stalking escalates in 81% of cases. A person who was stalked by a partner was also physically harmed by that partner. If we think about some other ways that a person may be coerced and threatened, think about coercion of engaging in illegal activities and then telling you you can't leave because you engaged in illegal activities, right? Convincing you, babe, I would do anything for you. Would you do anything for me? I can't do it because I already have this charge. So if you do it, and then all of a sudden the control has escalated to dependency and that a person cannot leave, right? We also just want to highlight that the presence of a gun in a home where domestic violence is present, right? It's not just the presence of a gun. The presence of a gun in a home with domestic violence makes it 5 times more likely that that violence will turn into murder. There are a lot of legislations put forth about preventing domestic abusers from purchasing firearms, and that is a mission that We just recognize also intersex, right? That there is this intersection, the intersection with mass violence and the presence of guns and domestic violence. These things do intersect, and we do have the power to make that change. We also want to realize that sexual abuse can take place within relationships. Sexual abuse can take place within marriages. As you see, spousal rape is a real crime. 18% of victims say their children witnessed this crime. Using rape as a form of power and control, because if you've seen any of our other workshops, that's what rape is. Rape is a crime of power and control. And maybe this, again, will help to understand the dynamics a little better. They're not using the rape to show love. The rape is about power, and the sex is the weapon. Forcing someone to terminate pregnancy, taping acts without consent, right? Anything without consent. Getting your way by accusing someone of cheating, right? There's jokes about how people will accuse their partner or smell certain parts of their partner to see if they're cheating or not, right? We want to encourage healthy relationships and with communication and fidelity, right? And honesty. We talked about the LGBTQ community and how those threats are considered sexual abuse. That threat wouldn't exist if it wasn't for that person's sexual orientation, right? And tampering with birth control. Those jokes about poking holes in condoms. I hope I'm not just making jokes that no one's ever heard. And I'm like, oh, but you may have heard these in the media and in movies, and how they consider trapping, right? These things are sexually abusive behaviors that have become part of our culture almost. Financial abuse can also exist within relationships. We were talking recently about someone who their partner kept showing up to their job and kind of frightening the people that were there, because it would be when they were angry, and she would come when she was angry, and everyone could kind of tell that. And eventually it ended up making the other victim, that the partner that was the victim, they lost their job. And that's another form of financial abuse, right? As well as taking all the money, not allowing a person to have any money that they earned. So the Safe Center also is under one roof with the Child Advocacy Center. We're able to serve the parents, potential parents or caregivers that are maybe in an abusive relationship, while also serving the children in our children's mental health, with our children's mental health services, in our Child Advocacy Center, because as you can see, many times, up to 50% of cases, there is a correlation between intimate partner violence and child abuse. The 1 in 8 DV homicides, the batterer kills 1 or more children. And unfortunately, that's what we saw in Bethpage. The person attempted to stab one of the children, maybe because they were intervening, right? These things are about having the power and control. It doesn't matter in that moment who the vulnerable person is. So we also see that sometimes the harm is accidental, and of course there is psychological harm, and we could imagine that.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
My dad's beating my mom.
Is that your mother screaming in the background?
Yeah, she is. My dad's trying to beat her.
Okay, we'll get someone out there. Stay where you are. They'll be there as soon as they can. I'm going to stay on the phone with you, okay?
Thanks.
No problem. Don't hang up.
Whoever your name is.
My name is Christina.
Okay, thank you, Christina.
You're welcome. I'm going to stay on the phone with you until our deputies get there, okay?
Okay.
911.
Hi, my mom's boyfriend. She punched her in the face.
What's your address, sweetie? Let me talk to mommy.
This is not the first time he has.
It doesn't matter. Tell me your address, okay? I want to help you. It's not okay.
No, it's not helping me. Nothing helps me. He hit me so hard in the left side of my head, I can't hear.
Standing emergency.
My mommy and having a fight.
Is she hitting her? How old are you?
I'm shake that my little sister's for. Nothing, don't take the baby. Nothing, you're gonna hurt the baby. Oh my God! What's the matter? Nothing happened. Just leave me alone.
Okay, so if we take a moment, right, I know that it's really not easy to listen to. I really hope we understand that none of this is easy or comfortable, and that may have been really hard to listen to. And we can see here that there is absolutely trauma that children experience if they are even exposed to battering. They don't have to see it. You see, they don't have to even be hit themselves, but there are absolutely effects that this type of violence has on children, and that those calls may have been a real insight into that. If we think about who society blames for domestic violence, I just want to quickly talk about a case that is more recent, maybe just because Netflix has taken over the story, which is really interesting, and we'll look at that a little as well. If we think about from the outside looking in, have we ever heard any of these terms? When they ask, why don't they just leave? Right? This is something that is really common. If you say that someone's being hit, people will say, I would never deal with that, or she should just leave, or that they're such a nice person, right? So thinking about how we can combat some of these interactions. Also thinking that this doesn't happen, right? Like, does this actually happen in society? So let's take a look at a real life case that maybe you are familiar with. If you recognize this picture, this is the family of Shanann Watts and Chris Watts and her little babies. Chris Watts ended up killing his pregnant wife and his 2 babies. When people were informed about this and saw the Netflix documentary that exposed the ways that he was having an affair or multiple, that he unfortunately lied about this entire case scenario and said that she was missing until it was found out. And we are looking at some of the ways society thinks about domestic violence. And look at the ways they're talking about a pregnant woman who was murdered. She was a bully, and her being a bully is what makes the outcome not a surprise. Someone else said, Chris Watts deserves a medal for putting up with her. I'm sorry, but I can honestly say she got what she bargained for. I want to show you a quick clip that unfortunately shows a few more of the ways that those are the realities.
There is so much being said online in the dozens of Facebook groups and the tens of thousands of followers of these Facebook groups, these members. Everyone is tearing each piece of interaction between this couple apart. I just have to wonder if she even wanted Bella and Cece. Her parent-raising ideas were disturbing. The one that I would label the narcissist is Shanann. I think she drove him to lose his shit. Oh my God, she did not drive him. He did. She did. No, he did, Laura. She did. She drove him insane. Come on, why are you victim blaming? She was a bitch. There are people out there who believe he is innocent. And those conspiracy theories.
So, they really highlighted exactly what we were saying. Those were real comments made by people who are in these groups that are believing that this person's innocent and that it was her fault that this happened. And this is what advocates for survivors and victims are fighting and combating against, and just recognizing this really is what we're up against, that these myths really do exist. The myth that alcohol can cause this crime, right? That they list exactly what will happen no matter who you are, that it may have these effects on you. but they never tell you that it may turn you into an abuser. So we don't want to allow alcohol to be used as an excuse on either side, because when someone tells you they only abuse when they're drunk, you'll meet someone else who tells you they only abuse me when they don't have alcohol because they need their substance, right? It is not the person, it is not the alcohol, it is the abuser. We can also dispel the myth of mutual abuse, that an unhealthy or toxic relationship is considered mutual abuse. When we are looking at domestic abuse or domestic violence, we are talking about patterns of control by one partner that are used to gain and maintain that control over another partner. It is not a back and forth bad relationship. And that is where we want to highlight that maybe an unhealthy relationship that is not past the point of abuse can be referred to certain safe places to maybe have a healthy relationship. But if we look here at dangerous referrals for domestic violence relationships, if there is a relationship that is completely, there's such a stark difference in the power, and we put them in a room like a counseling center or a mediation room where everyone is meant to be on equal playing field, maybe an abuser is really good at acting that way in public, because sometimes we'll hear that, just like we looked at that perfect house, that they're so nice. Look at them in all these videos. He's such a good dad. He loves his kids, right? And it's a really good ability for them to manage their anger. So if we look quickly at anger management and why that might be a bad referral, is because these people are perfect at managing their anger. They only show it to the people that they want to experience it, the people that they feel are vulnerable to them. So we do just want to look at some of the ways that society is sometimes misinformed, right? We tell our friends, get couples counseling. We tell our friends, just leave. We tell victims, get out of that relationship. And I want to remind you that the most dangerous time for a victim of abuse is when they attempt to leave. The advice of telling someone you need to get out of there may be what kills them. There are so many other resources that we can provide in a healthy, safe way, because as we said, they're attempting to leave and that could be unsafe. So what if they find our Safe Center card? What if they find a domestic violence hotline written down, right? We want to make sure we provide resources in a safe way. There are new protections for survivors of abuse. This came about in 1994, where there has to be a report made, there has to be a primary aggressor identified, and there has to be an arrest made if the primary aggressor is not identified and arrested. So they will take both people into a separate place to speak on this issue, because as we know, an experienced abuser can just give their partner a look and the victim will say, don't arrest my partner. They did nothing wrong, right? So we want to be in a safe place to get the information from all parties involved. If we're not counselors and we're not clinicians and we are friends and we want to be there for someone, there are ways to help a person. And the way that society has taught us, it's sometimes easier to say, why would you put up with that? Why don't you just leave? Right? So take a look at some of these helpful phrases. Are you okay? Do you feel safe? Reminding them no one deserves to live with violence. You are not to blame. If we know that abuse is about control, how empowering it must be when you give the victim control and you ask them, what do you want to do? I want you to make the decisions because this is your life and your healing process, right? So that's how we get that sense of control back, because we're aware of what the violence is about, where it stems from. So as we said, there are many services, free and confidential services that the Safe Center offers. That hospital advocacy program now is mainly on call, mainly through teleservices, but we often usually have advocates on call 24/7 who will go and meet a survivor of domestic abuse, human trafficking, sexual abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault. So we're there right in that moment to tell them about the Safe Center. And that was so empowering, and I learned so much. I also realized I need to be there before. I will always be there for survivors, but I also want to be there before. And I want to talk to you now and let you know that these services exist, that help is available, legal services, individual and group counseling. We have the only shelter in Nassau County. And we can also help people with transportation and with other shelters, also with transitional housing, meaning getting back on their feet and getting their own place, with rental assistance. Human trafficking court is a way that we are able to look at these survivors as survivors and victims rather than people who are soliciting prostitution or people who are prostitutes, right? So there are a lot of ways that the Safe Center is changing the culture as well as changing behaviors and changing how we treat one another. So the services also include safety planning. If we recognize that it is really dangerous to just leave, sometimes it's impossible because when the abuser finds out, they drain the bank accounts and they slash the tires, and these are real stories. So we want a safety plan for a person. We want to know that while they're in the relationship, they can ease out of it, and when they are free from that relationship, they are safe. So that's something the Safe Center can do. That's something that our hotline can connect you with further services for. We also have services for children. Like we said, this type of violence affects everybody. And now, as we said, being under one roof, we have child victim advocates. We have our entire child advocacy center, which is painted beautifully and empowers children in this way. And we also have support groups for kids, because if adults know the power of that connection and the power of that support, we were allowed to safely do that with the children and their non-offending family members. And that's a really wonderful program. Ending off with our hotline, that is a 24/7 resource. Someone will always answer the phone. And if you follow us on social media, you will always know if there's any issues, and then you can always reach out in a different way. But this hotline operates 24/7. We have plenty of language translations to accommodate all survivors, as well as the Police Project, which can help us get in touch safely with potential victims. Maybe there was a police report that seemed like it was domestic violence, and we can safely find out if they need services or want services. So thank you so much for being here, taking the time to be part of this presentation.